Доброго дня.
Greetings, dear participants of today's event in Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Today we have, so to say, an ordinary but also special event because it is organized due to a very important for Ukraine, but not only for Ukraine, but also for our international partners. So that is sociology during the war, and you know that this is at most important question, especially when nowadays both Ukrainians and Ukrainian politicians and our international partners mostly rely in their peace plans, in ceasefire, on the moods in Ukrainian society. And in this sense, you probably have seen that it is so important nowadays for all the data collected by the specialists, by the sociologists, for them to be commented, for them to be used in media, and to be used in the proper way, and to be interpreted in a proper way. Because when we see some slight change in the numbers, for example, the recent survey has shown that we had 0.8% of difference of higher level of those people who wanted to get ceasefire. It was, and in the Western media, you could have seen that Ukraine is ready to capitulate. And of course, it is very concerning because we've seen things like that in the important moments of Ukrainian history and modern history. So we need to hear the opinion of the specialists, of the experts in this field. And therefore, today we have a special day. And it's not just coincidence. It is it is absolutely planned. The 4th of February, that is the date of birthday of Miss Iryna Bekeshkina, and Miss Iryna Bekeshkina has played a very big role, not only, I would even say, not even in the sociology itself, but in what I started to discuss in the beginning. So I would like to remind you that there was a period of time when these outstanding sociologists, scientists, woman, together with her colleagues, played a huge role. And I'm not afraid even to say, I will dare to say that she was the one who formed the future of Ukraine. And that is my impression from what I've wanted to say. Dear colleagues, I think you will tell your opinion about this occasion. I just wanted to remind you the exit poll, when we had a huge risk that Ukraine will have a long period of non-democratic regime, that we will forget about our democratic European way. And what was the most important, the opinions of Ukrainians were misexpressed, misinterpreted, and the parallel calculation of the votes did not work how it should have worked. And people have seen those part of the society which even nowadays, I'm quite sure, they will define the way to the future of Ukraine. And at that point of time, Iryna Bekeshkina, together with Volodymyr Paniotto, who is online with us today, and Andriy Buchenko, who is also present today in this audience today, together with the Foundation of the Democratic Initiatives, who are also present here. We have Oleksiy, Haran, and also the colleagues from Democratic Initiative Foundation. They have made a very strong step in the future. And despite a huge pressure, they ensured democracy, fairness of the polls. They organized the exit poll, which has changed the move forward of Ukraine and made it normal once again. So that is, we can be discussing exit poll in the framework of our discussion, and therefore I would like to introduce, first of all, our participants of today's meeting. Today we have Volodymyr Paniotto, Director General of the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology, Professor of the Department of Sociology, Kyiv-Mohyla Academy University, and, as I already mentioned, outstanding activist. Oleksiy Haran, who is, I would say, co-author of this idea, as scientific advisor of at the moment, I'm scientific advisor to the Ilko Kucheriv Democratic Initiatives Foundation, and I think that it is also important to mention that Professor Haran is commenting in the right way the sociology, interpreting it as a specialist, as a professor, as the professor of the professor of political science of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy University. And it is also important to see this perspective, how the foreign partners perceive this information and how these numbers are perceived in general. Beside that, we have the foundation of the democratic initiatives. We will also have the Director General, and also we have people online and offline, and there are people who knew Ms. Iryna Bekeshkina really well and who are somehow related to this topic. The director, Anton Grushevsky, Executive Director of the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology, and quite often I'm reading your different comments because your support the data you present with your comments, and that is a very good example. And also the same thing is done by the Razumkov Ukrainian Center for Economic Political Research, and we have Andrei Buchenko, who also present the information in the same way. And Mr. Andrei Buchenko, who is the director of the Sociological Service of the Razumkov Ukrainian Center for Economic and Political Research, does it. And we also invited the key Ukrainian sociology companies, the sociology group, Katerina Skrypchenko, the deputy director of the group, and also you can quite often meet the data from group rating, and the representatives of rating group quite often they comment on this information and they explain how the information will be perceived. So I can say that we were also inviting the director of the sociology of the academy, and Mr. Holovacha, and the head or the director of and Mr. Churilov. Right now they are organizing, they have the scientific board meeting, and therefore they will not be able to participate. But nevertheless, we have discussed that this topic will be discussed later, and we will work on the methodologies and the interpretation of data, and we have a broader discussion of the key Ukrainian sociological companies. So with this, I would like to pass the mic to Mr. Volodymyr Paniotto, and I would like to say, first of all, a few words about Ms. Iryna Bekeshkina, who this event is dedicated to. And dear colleagues, I would like to ask you a few words about Ms. Iryna Bekeshkina, about the importance, about the connection of these times relation. And it's a pity for me that today we do not have Ms. Iryna is not with us anymore, but quite obviously that those principles, those values, she said, are still important for us nowadays. So with this, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Volodymyr Paniotto. Greetings. I do not know whether you hear me clearly. Everything is fine. Indeed. Iryna Bekeshkina was a person we organized 16 exit polls with during all this time. And sociologists might have their own evaluation of, for example, the the ranges, the tables with ranges. For example, Holovacha in Scopus has the indicator that he has twice high indicator that any sociologist can have in Scopus. But for Ukrainians, Bekeshkina was sociologist number one. No doubt, not only for the society, but also for the government. Because we had a very important meeting. You remember there was important meeting between Yanukovych, and Yanukovych cared for Bekeshkina to work, and he wanted to prove her that despite her activities, he became the president, and that was the mission he set for himself. And we were present at that meeting, and when I was writing about Bekeshkina, one woman wrote, "It's a pity that Bekeshkina died instead of Paniotto, very kind woman." Beside that, I got additional. I got my respect also because someone has written that Paniotto is Bekeshkina's student, and therefore people were respecting me more because they considered me Bekeshkina's student. Iryna had a unique position in sociology communities. She was a star, and that happened because she had three personal properties. First of all, she was both a sociologist and journalist, and she was able to talk about very complicated things in a simple way. And she was finding some phrases, some jokes which were well perceived. And for example, there are lots of jokes she made about sociology, and people were well perceiving her. And she was, for example, saying that the centers, so that there should be a certification for sociological centers, and she called it the hangman certification, and that helped us to avoid this process, and these kind of things that were the jokes she was finding. So you have to have a gift for that. Besides that, she was very honest and the person of principles. She was not afraid to express her opinion. She was not afraid to be in conflict with someone, especially when the topic was related to falsification of the polls. And third of all, she was very enthusiastic. She dedicated all her life to sociology. I do not know much about her personal life. I know that she had cats, the only thing I know, but it was obvious that at any point of time she was responding the letters. So it was all her life. She was dedicating all her life to sociology, and I have to say that unfortunately, until now, there is no other person who would have been sociologist for the society. And Holovacha, from time to time, he finds proper wording for some things, but still it's not the same. And therefore, it's a pity. It's a pity that Iryna is not with us anymore, and we miss her. It's quite a while since she passed away. And as for this topic, I do not know whether you want me to switch to the topic or first... Okay, so thank you, Mr. Volodymyr. First, we will say a few words about Ms. Iryna Bekeshkina, and after this, we will be able to move to the topic. So it's quite obvious that we can dedicate a long discussion to this topic, but nevertheless, I think that at this point, we will limit ourselves with these words, and I know that Mr. Kucheriv, who is with us, thank you for coming. And in this book, we can see your very long, and very emotional, and very good evaluation of the role of Ms. Bekeshkina. And now the quintessential. Could you tell us more about it? To those who watch online, we have simultaneous interpretation, and so please consider that we have simultaneous interpretation. Please, could you sit closer to us, if you don't mind? Thank you very much, Mr. Valerii. I didn't expect you to invite me immediately, and so as for quintessential, I think that it's in the name. Bekeshkina, and Mr. Volodymyr has said it. Bekeshkina became the person who the society needs, and that is extremely important. And you know, today I was thinking about, so the further she is from us, the more me as her good friend, I can say that she was very modest, very delicate regarding the other. So this person was not saying that her me is higher than the others, except for the cases when she had to prove something, and that is not an often met skill. So the more we can the further she's from us, the more we see her figure blooming, flourishing. So, and as for sociology, that is a mood that's set in the society. And I can see one topic which I would like to talk about, if you don't mind. That is a very delicate question. That is a fairness regarding the protection of Ukraine and motherland. So that is a topic regarding the fairness of mobilization, the fairness and the elements of democracy which we can see in the Ukrainian army. I do not know whether it is something we can be discussing nowadays, because there are very difficult topics. But nevertheless, I would like sociology to pay attention to this, because there is obvious lack of fairness regarding the distribution of the roles of the defenders. We can see some of them are executed, from which groups of categories of people, which categories of people get to mobilize. So that is a very delicate question, because there is a war, and quite obvious some of these things cannot be publicly discussed or publicly expressed. Nevertheless, there is some certain border, and we can and if Iryna would have been with us, she was the person, and Volodymyr has said it really right. She was able to explain some complicated things in some simple ways. Complicated because of the databases used, and I can name lots of cases when we were going somewhere together, and when people were asking her, and she was explaining some things, and I think that would have been interesting for her to deliver these messages. So there are people regarding whom she had her own personal attitude. Our attitude, our perception of people was quite different sometimes. So, for example, one of the cases, regarding one of the person, I was saying that you should not be punishing him in such a strict way. And now I can see that this person is among those, not among the pro-Russians proxies, but among those activists, former Ukrainian activists, who came to power, who joined power, and they became non-critical at all. So once again, I would like to say that from the point of view of the fair way of evaluation, and in the future, and now I can see that she was right. It's a pity that she is not with us anymore. Thank you. For a philosopher and the head, the director general of the Renaissance Foundation, thanks to whom many of these polls have taken place. And Andriy Bekeshkina was mentioning how that Yanukovych came to threaten Bekeshkina. I guess we were together sitting at the table. And by the way, it happened in Ukrainian house here, right here with us. So we're the press center of Ukraine Crisis Media Center. It was Independence Day in 2010, and indeed, for some reason, we were together. The heads of the sociological companies were here. So, I mean, all of those who were looking for truth. But this idea belonged not to Viktor Yanukovych. It belonged to his head of the administration, most likely. But nevertheless, I do remember this discussion. In the end of the day, the president has lost, the new president has lost, because he was not able to answer the questions of the sociologists. He was found of his new role of the winner of the elections, and our words, and I remember what I've said. And the joke Yanukovych has told us, it was just partially the joke, but at the same time it was a threat. But nevertheless, we told him that don't rush. It's not the end of this story. If you will choose pro-European way, there was an idea that he will choose European way, but he gave up to the Russians, and in the end of the day, our predictions came truth and not his. So I remember this discussion, and I remember what has happened in the country after this. So from time to time, the presidents, they have less value for the country than the civil society and the most active people in this civil society. Andriy Bekeshkina. So I understand. I get it. Well, I would have said that we, after Paniotto and Bystritsky, me speaking about Miss Iryna Bekeshkina it's difficult for me, because even though I know her quite well, but I know her less. And of course, it's a pity that she is not with us anymore. And she was, thanks to those position she had in Ukrainian society and sociology, she was able to conduct her work much easier, and she was making the work of sociologists much simpler and easier, because she knew how to coexist with the government and with bad people and very demanding people and donors. She was doing all of these things much easier. So in this case, that is my unique experience. I cooperated a lot with different clients, as sociologist with clients, and that were both Ukrainian politicians and NGOs and activists, international institutions and scientific institutions. And the foundation of the democratic initiatives, but Miss Iryna was my best client. Due to the way how she worked. And in addition to that, even beside that, she was doing things less stressful, the communication with the government or with the society at those point of time, when the government was not just critical But we had even the points of time when the government was aggressive regarding sociologists, and it can happen. For example, you have a birthday or some important meeting, and then you have 38, and then you're sick, and you understand that you cannot go to the meeting, you cannot go to the birthday, but there is no one else to help you except for your temperature with you. And the way to measure the moods in the society is the sociological center. And when people were angry, like they were angry on your illness, they are helping to organize your life and to understand your life better. So at this point, I think we have to pass the floor to the Institute of Democratic Initiatives, Oleksiy Haran, and not just because it's a foundation, because at that time, Mr. Oleksiy, as far as I remember, he was not in the foundation, but nevertheless, you have some notes taken. And now we have the representatives of the foundation, but I would like to ask you to wrap up this commemorative part. And after this, we will move to the topic of today's discussion. Thank you very much. I would like to thank on behalf of the foundation to everyone who came, and a special gratitude to Mr. Valerii to organize this event on Miss Iryna Bekeshkina's birthday. She was called the Lady of the Ukrainian Sociology. And she entered the public discourse very fast, and it happened due to those exit poll which has shown falsification. That was 2004, which has shown falsifications. And yes, it was organized by a consortium, and we know that not all of the sociologists were able to overcome the pressure that was conducted and the attempts to bribe sociologists, but nevertheless, we had our partners without, that is Komisa, that is Razumkov Center, which were the part of this consortium, and we had data, and we applied this data, which have shown how everything was organized. And Iryna Bekeshkina participated a lot in all of the events, and she was commenting on these during and after this event. And after this, she was writing that, let me quote her, that there was no sufficient evaluation regarding what has happened at that time on Maidan, considering the results which were showed by different institutions. Some of them were obviously, so to say, helping the government. And Ms. Iryna was saying that the board did not evaluate those events and didn't manage their task. So we knew that at that point there were the protests of the sociologists. Natalia Panina has left the ethics commission position, and the vice president Valerii has also retired. But after this, there was no sufficient evaluation of the processes of the Association of Sociologists. And what did it lead to after this, even though it seemed that we kind of have the coalition, but nevertheless the other organizations, so they were publishing some information, and that's it. These no fact-checking, nothing. So I think that we will have the opportunity to discuss it later. And Iryna Bekeshkina had an idea to organize. So we had consortium, of centers which managed to overcome this pressure. They wanted to establish the civil consortium, which would have been independent from, so to say, commercial income and could have organized some sociological researches. And the last thing I would like to say is that we have already said that she was both a sociologist and journalist and activist, and I also would like to say a bit about her phrases. In this book about Miss Iryna, we had a separate part, and Mr. Volodymyr has mentioned some of them. That is a hangman for a sociologist, and she was very precise when saying the most scary government is stupid. The opposition has to meet the people and not to cry with, not to shout in megaphone. So that we're regarding the Yanukovych time. Putin has annexed Crimea, but he has lost Ukraine. If mass media will write something, so if mass media publish something from fake media,
ничего. На жаль. И
so she was very critical about fake media and lack of fact checking, and at that time she was saying that I do not believe in clinical idiotism, even of the Ukrainian journalists, that they place everything in mass media. And I wish you were treated by the doctors as fair as you are a fair journalist. So we know that many mass media are publishing misinformation, and I think it's very relevant when we have lots of information published without fact-checking, and also when it comes to sociological data, lack of context, everything for hype. And I think that of course, the best memory, the best way to memorize Miss Iryna, when all of us will show good results, and they will be covered in a professional way by the journalists and mass media. Thank you. I think that part was quite intensive, and I think that my colleagues will tell more about the content, because I guess you know this name, Iryna Bekeshkina, not from what we were just discussing. So with this, I would like to move to the part which Mr. Professor Haran has already mentioned, that is a connection with those times. So I have a question to Mr. Volodymyr Paniotto, who is on remote on Zoom with us. So I would like you to answer the question. So the question popped out in my mind. So we had exit poll, and now we are talking at least about newly appointed special representative of Donald Trump, General Kelkan, and he has said that we have to organize elections. So that is a good thing, democratic elections. And what about exit polls during the war and during the elections? Is it possible to organize it? And do you think it's worth doing? If we will have elections one day, can we organize exit poll during it? Thank you. I was already telling to some of the journalists, you cannot organize elections because we will not be able to organize the proper exit poll. And the thing is, indeed, exit poll is a standard to check the results. Even in 2010, when Tymoshenko has said that she doesn't believe that the elections will be fair and that she will organize Maidan if something will be wrong. But she lost only 3%. But due to the fact that all exit polls proved it, she agreed with these results. In this case, if we will have elections, then 6 million, 8 million, according to different evaluations, of people have to participate the elections. And it is said that we will have the elections during the ceasefire, and it means that servicemen will be able to participate. But the moments which circulate now, that is voting with Dia app, there is e-voting, then we have the postal voting, and all of these methods not be cross-checked by exit poll. And if these elections will be organized, they most likely not only give the legitimacy, but on the contrary, they will be very much doubted. And it will be very hard to check them. So our survey shows that people do not trust none of these substitutions for the voting on the voting polls. And I think that voting will be a very hard question, and it will be forced to do that, so that is going to be a big trouble for us. And by the way, I wanted to mention this meeting with Yanukovych. Mr. Valerii, you were saying that Ms. Bekeshkina writes that you were asking Yanukovych not to make a pro-Ukrainian choice, and he has promised you, and he didn't do what he promised. Yes. And speaking of the evaluation of the reliability of the elections, so we were discussing these questions for a long time, and these questions were discussed both during 10. I participated 10 international meetings and some international, but. I think that is your task to deliver this message to Ukrainians. How can we know that our data are reliable? So first of all is consensus and the elections. And in 2019, and considering the fact that we were organizing our samples on the basis of the statistics, without census, which we didn't have for 20 years, surprisingly. By the way, it was very surprising for me. Everyone who were present and everyone who participated in the elections and were making prognosis 2 weeks prior to the first and second round, all of them, they were successful, not more than 3% deviation. And therefore, if we will do the same this time, in this case, we can consider that our data nowadays, they will continue being representative, except for some groups which are not reachable, and we have to understand what kind of impact they can have. For example, speaking of the servicemen, I think this category is something that of high concern of Mr. Valerii. So we have around 25 million population at the moment of people who are 18 plus years old, and out of them, around 1 million of servicemen, meaning that it's 4%. The evaluation of deviation is measured as these 4% multiplied on the difference between the division of the servicemen and the rest of the population. For example, the population considers that 50% agree for a compromise, and only 30% among the servicemen agree for consensus. So we multiply 4 by 20, so it's 0.8%, and it's very hard to imagine how high can be the difference? 20% is quite a significant difference, and we rarely have this kind of a difference. But even if we have 30-40%, it's going to be 0.5%. So with the servicemen, the deviation would have been, for example, we would have had not 50%, but 49% in the result. And therefore, we have evaluated the contribution of different groups, occupied territories and the rest, and in the end we get the number that our data is representative for 94% to 92-94% of the population of Ukraine. And if we have conducted the survey among all the people, in this case the deviation would have been 1 or 2 additional percent. But of course there are systematic deviations. Beside this, maybe my colleagues are going to cover this question also. There are some certain methods. In my article, I have mentioned 11 ways to control this deviation. We have conducted the experiments, and we have seen that we have a shift around 5-6% towards 5-6% less of those who are more pro-Russian. What helps us in this case? In sociology, we are interviewing those who are in Ukraine. Before the war, we had 1-2 million people working abroad, and we did not conduct survey in the country. And typically, these data shouldn't be merged. We cannot ask the people whether they go to the bomb shelters when they are residing in Germany now. So that is a separate group of people who have to be interviewed separately. Can I clarify, Mr. Volodymyr? I would like to ask you regarding the servicemen meanings. So we do understand that there is population. Some part of them were interviewed, but nevertheless, this part, some servicemen are serving since 2014, and most of them serve since 2022. Their answers are quite similar when answering some questions. If you ask these questions to this part of people, to the people who are very important, most important at the moment, there are no more important people, not the politicians, not the government, the servicemen who are defending the countries. And if their opinion, as you say, it is going to be taken account in this way, and for example 95% of them will be for some certain position, what would it mean? It means that we are not able to use your methods to take in account the opinion of such a big number of people, or you have some kind of other. It's true that is a provocative question, but nevertheless people would like to hear the answer. In our sociological research, our opinion, the opinion of different people, is considered to be the same ones. We do not consider that the opinion of some people is more important than the others. And so you politicians, you can have legal initiatives, and for example during the elections, the servicemen will have 2 votes instead of 1. I do not know whether the Ukrainians will perceive it well. So if we take the general population, we will have a 45% difference, and 4% out of them. So meaning they will add 2%, not 50% will have in the end, but for example 52%. So servicemen, in fact, they give us only 1 or 2%. In this, from the sociological point of view, they are not. We do not consider who is more important, who is less important. Thank you very much. I hope that you will remain with us, because we still have some more questions. And now I would like to ask your colleague from the Kyiv National Institute of Sociology, but maybe so. I also read some scientific works of Mr. Volodymyr Paniotto, and you use the same data, but nevertheless, could you tell us, please? Me, as a data user, I always had a question. And Andrei Buchenko, who we were working with in the Razumkov Center, will prove that why Ukraine is divided into parts. We know that we can see lots of sociologists who do not divide it. In the US, they don't do that. So, well, yes, they do that, but that is a bit of the federative issue. In China, they do it partially, but in the East, they do it. In the Russian Federation, you will not see that. In Ukraine, it's often north, east, southwest. So I know who was the author of this methodology. All of us know, and those who are present with us nowadays. And maybe it's a time to revise this division, because we have different sociological structures, and they divide the regions in a different way. And we know that's just one of the questions. But do you see, besides what was said by Mr. Paniotto, do you see some kind of additional specifics? Do you see something that is not that obvious for us at the moment? Thank you. That is a very good question, and actually among those questions which I wanted to highlight, because after Mr. Volodymyr, it's hard to add something serious. But the question of the regions, it is the answer to your policy you had, and in fact, we quite often can hear, why do you divide into the regions by the language? You know why it does. It's kind of creating some kind of division. In our classification, we also use a few classifications of the regions, and they are developed by the behavior, political behavior, and also other sociological indicators. And depending on the topic, the classification can be different. In some of the cases, 10-15 years ago, were more important. We had geopolitical rotation. The regions played a big role. And nowadays, in fact, after the full-scale war, we can say that because they have smoothed down. And you are correct, because on the one hand, it is reason why we shouldn't emphasize on them, but there are two more things. The first one, there are new regional structures due to the war, because when we will come back to the restructuring, we will have the frontline territories which were hurt. We will have the rear armadas, and anyways, that are going to be different priorities, and they will require different attention, not to have the average temperature in the hospital, but for us to take in account. The second component is political, because I do not know whether it works for you, but for us in the West, we have theoretical perception of Ukraine as divided country. After the full-scale war, I read Huntington and the clash of the civilization and his vision of Ukraine, but this work has changed the perception of Ukraine. Ukraine is perceived theoretically, and there is the East is pro-Russian, Russian-speaking, and probably you have different mindsets. And with this data, we show that, okay, you think that we are different, but no, they are not different. They have pro-Euro integrational vectors. So your opinion, when we have the same number, it shows that we are concealing something. And speaking of the servicemen, and that is answering your question, we are giving the general data, or should we separate the servicemen's opinion or some categories, or should we include them in the general opinion? But you're correct. The opinion of the people who have the highest legitimacy, it has to be taken into account, even though I can say that in any survey, 1.52% that are those who are in the law enforcement of Ukraine. So we have some of them, they also participate, but nevertheless not enough for them to be divided separately. And therefore, this division of these data on the regions, it remains accurate for us and for our friends in the south, and for our enemies, to show that we are overcoming our differences and we are striving for the united country. So as far as I understand, you have to slow down a bit. Thank you very much. You explained everything very briefly, and I can say that indeed the situation has changed, and now your division proves that is fine, but why it lasted for so long and why it gave the reason to divide Ukraine, so that is my personal opinion. So I think that at some certain stage, when it will be over, we will have to reconsider the situation. Yes, you can ask a question. So the question is that maybe we have to move from these 4 regions division. Maybe we have to divide it in the other way. I remember that we were dividing, for example, the northern regions. So we have to add some additional regions to make it more accurate. So that is a question. So let me answer that different organizations have different macro regions. Some of them have 5, some of them have less. Some are asking, should we consider the Polish as a part of the south or the east? Or maybe we have divided Zakarpattia, Bukovina, and Галичина, and some of the campaigns, when they have can have bigger samples, they can divide, they can have more regions. But then there is a question of the criteria. How do we select them? Okay, so we understood that you do not have geographical criteria. That is the first thing. And that is very weird for me, because the Zakarpattia, dividing Zakarpattia, not because it's geographical, but to make it more comfortable for the sociologists to show the division. Well, the decision has to be made on the other grounds. So you have to have more resources to have a better survey there. But okay, I would like to listen to Ms. Tatiana Skripchenko. And what about you? The east of Ukraine, what do you consider to be the east of Ukraine, and also the north? Do you have the same approach as Mr. Anton has mentioned? Not geographical one, but more kind of, I would say, I do not know even how to call it. Well, a few more words about the servicemen, if you don't mind. So they are also the part of the survey, and we cannot say that we do not take into account their opinion. And it's not 1 or 2%, that is 5-6%. And if we're talking about the phone survey, where we are generating the samples, and we always have servicemen, 5-6% at least, and also 2-3 thousands are considered separately, and quite often they are not for that much different from the average answer. Sometimes more optimistic, sometimes less optimistic, but all in all we can say that they are in our samples and we can see their opinion, and sometimes when it is possible we can analyze it separately. And in some of the surveys, so we conducted them only among the servicemen, and for example regarding the Rome Statute. And by the way, what were the results? Because that is important. Rome Statute, and Ukraine has joined it, and that is a good thing from my point of view as the international affairs specialist. But also, that's the opportunity to make the servicemen to be responsible on the international level. So I mean the war crimes. And what did the servicemen answer? So you were asking the audience which a priori had to be against it. But that is the reason why we were asking this question, because was important to hear their opinion. And nevertheless, they agree that we have to implement it. Maybe not 90% of them, but most of them support it, and they understand what we are talking about, and they understand what kind of question you're asking them about, and they understand what you're talking about, and therefore we cannot say that we expel them. Sometimes, on the contrary, we have a separate meetings with them, because in this case their opinion was at most important, because and we saw that they also support this question. Returning to the regions, they have geographical division. And in the beginning of the war, we continued showing the regions in the classical, so to say, way. And if you want to prove the NATO, that, and when you're talking about these kind of things, ideological questions, it has diluted these differences to show that they are not the same as they used to be before the war. And then we have an interesting thing, because we also agree that we have to change it. And in many of our surveys, we try, so we do not have a kind of single approach, but we are trying to change this approach. When, for example, with UNICEF, we were discovering the mine security, and we can see that in this case, 4 regions cannot be used. We had the region which was mined, and it was identified only with the card of the State Emergency Situation Service, and the same thing regarding the other surveys regarding the reintegration to occupied territories. So there are the attempts to divide, for example, kind of frontline territories, and that are Kharkivska, Zaporizhska, Khersonska Oblast. We also conduct the surveys there, Mykolаївська, Odetska. It's kind of about, so it's not a classical west, east, south, and north. We are trying to divide it into frontline territory separately, north in some cases when we are talking about the occupation, and for example, Kievska, Chernihivska Oblast, they were also divided, Sumska, as recently occupied ones, and that is, it depends on the topic of the research and what do we need to identify for it, because Khersonska and Sumska, they will be very different. You cannot combine in one region. So we kind of have similar approach is when we are talking about these frontline territories, which are obviously different. From the humanitarian perspective, the evaluation of these questions, and also the political questions. And then we divide center. Kyiv is divided because it's really very different in the economical, from the economical perspective. So that's not the classical perspective we had. We did not develop some unique approach, but nevertheless, luckily, we have Khersonska Oblast and Zaporizhska Oblast and Kharkivska Oblast. We can include them, and we show them as a separate region because donors are interested in it, and people are interested in what the people who are suffering the most at the moment, because they are close to the front line, are suffering from. What is their opinion? Thank you very much. I would like to. So we'll return to this. Thank you for this clarification. And I would like to ask Mr. Andrei Bychenko about some certain things. So I was ordering, we were, so to say, together we were developing the questions and the answers. So it's not just a question. I'm using his services for quite a long time, as well as Mr. Haran. So we've heard Mr. Volodymyr. I have my deep respect to his evaluation, and he said that everything is fine. Everything is fine, and that's a separate thing about the serviceman, but I mean the sample. So I have a simple question. So Mr. Volodymyr was mentioning what was happening during the elections which took place before this full-scale war. And we have a big shift since that time. And in fact, a simple question, just samples. So we understand what do we have to pay attention to. Of course, you are the specialist, you can correct it, but nevertheless, could we tell the people on how we can read the data which were quite clear before the full-scale war? At some point, all the journalists learned how to write the documents, and what is the deviation, what can be. I'm even forgetting these kind of things. So the main, for example, at least what is deviation, and who were ordering these surveys. But what about your personal vision? Do we have some correction? So let's say I'm using data, and I can see that the number has changed, so around 3% change, and the sample. The deviation 3.5. Should I perceive this data the same way as I perceived it before the full-scale war, or should I make some correction myself, and should I expand the deviation for my purposes of the evaluation of the moods of the society? That is the first question. And maybe the second question, that is a question to my colleagues, these phone surveys, because we understand that, for example, We have the elections. I do not see the perspective of the elections, and if we will have the E part of it, so to say, the phone part. So how reliable will be this data, and what will be the specifics of this data, the specifics of this data, considering the war in Ukraine? So first of all, I'm confident that you are asking this not for yourself, but for the broader audience, because quite obviously you know that a sample is not something unchangeable, that it can be different for different comparison. And those sample which is mentioned, that is for those which is close to 50%. And the closer we are to the end of the scale, 0 or 100%, the more deviation decreases. So you just reminded me. I guess we were overcoming this funny moment together long before the full-scale war. One political potential client was saying, so I have a 2% rate. Deviation is 3%, so I kind of have 5%. So before the war, it didn't work this way, and after the full-scale war, it didn't change. It is higher, closer to the ends of the scale. And Mr. Volodymyr Paniotto has quoted systematic deviation, very boring name, which occur from time to time. And the real deviation, I would say that theoretical deviation is more or less the same we had before the full-scale war. It is, I'm scared to say that having Mr. Paniotto in this room, because I think that I understand this question, but but no one can be as good as Mr. Paniotto. I'm not an exception because Big Brother is always watching us, but nevertheless, it's we have different systematic deviations, and they are. We have the article where it is described, and they have different nature, starting from, so to say, all of us know that in any kind of survey, we interview not all respondents who are in the sample, but only those who agreed to answer the questions. And under the peaceful conditions, so there are the reasons to consider that most or the majority of these people, they refuse because maybe they are bored, or they do not want, maybe they do not have time. Considering the situation, considering these kind of big problems, and of course there is no other bigger challenge than the war, we can say that the people refuse due to the same reason, and it creates some systematic deviation. And therefore, of course, we're trying to evaluate the situation, and I'm afraid to interpret Mr. Volodymyr's words, but as far as understood, the thing that he said, maybe he didn't emphasize on this, but nevertheless he mentioned it, that before the full-scale war, the last census, even at that time, was 20 years before the poll. So, and even despite this fact, we as a sociological community, even though the example is quite old-fashioned, but nevertheless we were showing quite good results, which could have been tested on during the elections. Yes, during the elections, presidential and parliamentary ones in 2019. I remember that. Yes, so I would have continued this sort in this way. So all of these things were happening to support high preciseness on the grounds of the sociologist approaches, who were trying to somehow work with data, with those ethanol data we had 20 years ago, and we continue trying to do that, and that gives us maybe not the grounds, but at least the hope that those data which we have at the moment, they quite reliable, quite accurate, even though, of course, there are some systematic deviations. And here I can say that for 6 million of Ukrainians abroad, I can doubt that, because I have seen different evaluations, and considering the situation when no one knows how many Ukrainians do we have in Ukraine, and of course under these conditions we cannot identify how socio-demographic situation has changed, and moreover we have some unclear things regarding the temporary occupied territories. We do not know who is remaining there, how many of them, how many civilians were killed, and we even do not want to be talking about these scary things. But I think that even in Mariupol we had lots of civilians killed. I think the same numbers we had as in Bucha and Mariupol we had. So there are lots of things which make our work harder and increase the general deviation thanks to the systematic mistakes. But once again, when we have the phone survey, when, so to say, it is possible to have the absolutely random sample by the phone numbers, it is somehow nivellated. But nevertheless, we have some other deviations because the level of the refusals to answer is quite high, and in this case, we have to be talking about some serious systematic deviations. But all in all, I can say that the preciseness is quite accurate. The accuracy is quite high, and if you don't mind, I would like to add a bit on the regions and the servicemen. Yes, please, but I would like to say one more thing, because I hope that Mr. Professor Haran will also be asking the questions. In the US, by payroll program, those people who achieved, there were around 200,000 people. We have the exact numbers, and everything is stopped now. Those people, it's very hard to say, but I have never met even one person who had the phone, who kept the messenger with Ukrainian number. They are using American phones, and even staying in the US requires you to have the phone number. So we can suggest that many of these people shifted to the American numbers. Do you have, as KMIS, Razumkov centers, do you have the American numbers in the systems of the phone surveys? Mr. Volodymyr was mentioning that. Do you have it or you don't? No, we don't. All the surveys, I just wanted to explain. So it was mentioned that all the surveys, both those which were conducted before the war and those which are conducted now, they are regarding the people who reside in Ukraine. And we are writing that. Because why I mentioned those people who left? Because we are, so to say, we have statistical data. And that is the only thing we can be relying on. And those people who left, they are out of the statistical data for us. So they are not the population which resides in Ukraine. And if their sociological demographic structure was the same as the population in general, in this case, we could have said that it is the minimum deviation. But considering the fact that their sociological demographic situation with high possibility. We cannot say 100%, but nevertheless high possibility. It is different from what we've seen. It means that taking them out of the existing population changes the sociological demographical situation in Ukraine. And that was the only reason why I mentioned that. So yes, indeed, we do not have surveys, and we do not have the US numbers, and we do not have the numbers of the Ukrainian migrants, and all sociological surveys we are talking about, which were conducted and are conducted now, that are the surveys among the people residing in Ukraine. So it's an important thing. Could you please pass the mic? So that is an important conclusion. That in fact, when conducting the survey, so it's we don't understand why. So in this case, the accuracy. So I do get what you are talking about now. So you also have the same system. Your conclusion, of course, partially is correct. We are not interviewing the majority, and that can be said about the most of the people who were residing here before 2022. But many of them are so integrated, and then there is a question whether we are the part of the Ukrainian society or the part of the new societies. But even the difference between the generations is different. So we conducted the experiments. For example, we were taking some men and women, not 45, 55, but for example, 55, 55. And we were changing their weight, and we were considering the final result. And it is not that much different. So Mr. Volodymyr was showing that in the example of the servicemen, we can play with these numbers, and we can see that some policies are supported not by 60%, but 63%. The difference is significant, but it's not changing significantly the results. So if you want to understand whether the accuracy has decreased, then yes, indeed, we have the problem, but this kind of problem exists both in the West, but still this is available information. No, that's not the conclusion. So I mean that I've heard that nowadays you are making kind of taking it into account, and those big segment which is outside the country is on the country. It's we can see that those the people who are not residing in Ukraine, their absence in these samples, lack of representations, make our all of these things, the surveys in Ukraine, more accurate. Please present yourself. And the question, I have a small. Maybe I shouldn't have been talking about Hanna Kysel, the professor of Sociology Cathedra, the Faculty of Sociology in Dragomanova University. I was the refugee for you program in 2024, and I had the first condition that I had to have the American phone number, but nevertheless I kept Ukrainian phone number, and I was reachable for you and for you. And have you been interviewed? Because they are not going to spend money, so you were not reachable for the interviewing, because they are not going to pay for the international phone calls, because messengers, you could have been talking to them. So please tell what you wanted to say. So maybe we have to reconsider this strategy and to conduct surveys on the Ukrainian segment and the segment with refugees. Do you have these kind of surveys? Well, separately on the refugees we do have, and these surveys are conducted not only by us, but once again, when we are talking about the samples, one of the first questions, in which oblast of Ukraine you reside, and you have the options there is no option of reside abroad, and they export from our samples. So we do not conduct the interviews with them. But we have the separate interviews with the refugees, but that are the separate refugees, the separate surveys, because as Mr. Anton has said, for many, as it is very hard to understand whether they are the part of the Ukrainian community or the other. Thank you very much. That is just the working question. So, okay, you understood. So we understood that you can still have Ukrainian phone number, but when you were there, and thank you for returning, now you're here, and now you can be interviewed by them. Not just the interview, they just not have your contact, but they can interview you. And this segment, it can be started separately. So I agree with you. The only thing I'm trying to show is the question which was asked. So we will listen in then to Mr. Paniotto as a kind of recapping of our discussion. And now I have the question to Mr. Oleksiy Haran. So we've heard, so my conclusion at this stage that we have more accurate data inside the country than are actually expected. So less issues with that. The only thing is that how can we use it? That are the hype in mass media, and the question which we were raising with Mr. Paniotto, the dynamics is also important in this case. So we also have to consider the dynamics. But speaking of the international partners, so the democratic initiatives were, and would like to thank them for this, you were creating the conditions for the sociologists to conduct their work. And we had consortium and a separate in researchers. So 2 questions. The first question. And for me, for example, it is obvious right now. So elections, potential elections, and the exit polls, which we have now, and they do not take in account a very big segment outside the country. We do not know how many of them. I can say that I have even the third numbers. Around 4-6, there is no single official number, unfortunately, and we do not know how many people, and the only information we can see is how many people legally cross the border. So that is another issue. But nevertheless, in Ukraine, reliable data, we have rates, and the politicians measure in their own way, and they asking the questions. But nevertheless, so we have some certain kind of system there. And this segment is not included. During the elections, we cannot expel them, right? No. So with high possibility, we can suggest that the picture of the rates can be very, very different. In this case, we have, and that's not about it's also about the critical questions. So the population of Ukraine, what kind of compromises? So I quite often hear it from the ambassadors, and it's quite official. What are the compromises you're ready for? Some territorial compromises and the internal policies. So what about the international partners? How can we explain them that all these measurements, they have to be interpreted in the proper way, taking account what we were discussing? And the second question, you were using, I don't know whether you were using some support of the donors, of the American donors. And now due to the issues with the financing, so I think that you had something like that. So you do not have donors at the moment. For example, the big part of them is not available. You do not have funds in the budget. And those that they had to support the government, so we have less opportunities. So how in this case we can organize independent sociology? Considering the fact that we don't have resources and we do not have, and we have these kind of issues. Mr. Oleksiy, what do you think about it? So I have forgotten the question. So the first question, let's start from the second one, and because it seems to me that it's easier to answer. So. Well, in fact, it's quite obvious that those who get grants, for them it is a big issue. If we're talking about us, the foundation of the democratic initiative, so we show who is sponsoring different surveys. For example, at the moment, we have institutional grant with USAID as well as many other organizations have. But we have, for example, these payments are not for the salaries, so that is just for the institute, for the development of the institution. So in this case, we can have some kind of surveys, and therefore for us it is going to be difficult for us. So we shall think on how to overcome this situation. So I just gave you the example. So we have one program from USAID, institutional one, for you not to be shouting that we are sitting on the grants. So considering the fact that now everything is postponed, yes, it in fact creates issues for us, and therefore those in sociological structures which have commercial orders, for them it is much easier to survive this situation. And if we are talking about donors in general, well, in fact, everywhere we are mentioning who is donor, whether it's Americans or the European Union or Norwegian. So let me finalize my thought. So I will forget it. Mr. Oleksiy, I'm not talking about this. I just do not want to be talking about the donors. I mean that the funds for sociology is decreasing. Are there any guarantees that there will be at least some resources for during the elections or after the elections to conduct sociology which is not paid for by the big programs or through pro-governmental structures? Where should we be looking for the funds? Well, it's not the question for me in this case, but for those who take the commercial orders. Because we, so to say, we thought that being on grants is being more independent than taking the money from someone, and then you understand what can be the consequences and limitations. And therefore, I would like to repeat that for us it is going to be a problem to preserve these type of the researches on American grant funds, because we also have the others. So let me return to the previous question. So how to explain it? So international partners use data of the nowadays sociology to explain the moods of the society, to form the plans, the peace plans. The moods of the society in these questions are not reflecting those part of the people who are residing abroad. And how in this way the international partners can make the conclusions about the situation in Ukraine, that, for example, majority in Ukraine agree with territorial compromises. Well, maybe my colleagues can add on this, but I can say that it's not just an impact on our international partners. The thing which we're discussing inside the country, we have to be explaining. But in this case, I'm quite skeptical because I'm quite skeptical that we will be able to explain and that is correct. Just pay attention to these numbers which go further, because you know how it works. Quite often in the same event, these numbers are torn out of the context, and it's very hard to explain it. And it's obvious that there are some attempts to explain these numbers during, for example, conferences and the private discussions. But nevertheless, I think that the experts who are sitting in the organizations which are developing the policies for Ukraine, many of them, they rely not just on the headlines, but also they try to consider in a complex manner these researches. But of course, there will be some schematizations, some simplifications. And if we are talking about, for example, policy, in this case, that can be some scheme which he was given on which license he is stable. In some cases, that can be just lies regarding the information, and it concerns not only the West, but also the problem. It's also the problem for our audience in Ukraine as well, because unfortunately, I have to say that Ukrainian journalists, they are taking something out of the context. And yes, indeed, we need the programs, educational programs for the journalists, for those journalists or maybe self-education for the journalists who use sociological data, for them to have enough preparation. And I think that in most of the cases they do not have this preparation, and therefore in mass media we quite often can see some information which is not meeting the reality. And here I would like to mention these attempts of publishing the rates, because we had the kind of consensus not to print the rates, and they were not printed, thanks God. So we understand that political parties organize them, the government and the opposition, that they have these rates, let it be. But let it be in the as a closed option. Don't just try to create the tension in the society. And therefore the election rates, in my opinion, have not to be printed. And unfortunately this agreement was violated by one of the structures. There were structures and that is a bad tendency, in my opinion. And moreover, I think that maybe that is a wrong thought. But dear friends, we were not publishing the rates of the, but we are publishing the rates of the institution. The institutions are okay, but when we leave the names, or for example, of the public activists, I'm not quite sure that that is fine. So that is the way we do. But nevertheless, it's also a problem because it creates some tension in the society. Maybe my colleagues won't agree with me. So that is the thing we do, and that is what everyone does. So and the last thing I would like to say, maybe it will be, so to say, for me, this point of view might not be acceptable regarding the others, but I think that all of us sociologists and those who conduct survey, we have to be very careful, and we have to consider what we suggest when we prepare some results of the survey, because some of the numbers, some numbers can be very dangerous. Some have to be prepared in the classified data, and sometimes the data which is published for the public. Well, anyways, both the Russian Federation and pro-Putin's useful idiots, so they are going to use this data, and we do understand that with every survey you can find in any survey any kind of positive and negative thoughts, and I think that you can do nothing with it. But nevertheless, if, for example, some data are very dangerous, so to say, in this case, I think that even for publishing, in this case, I think that we have to self-censor ourselves. I do not know what would my colleagues say about it, but nevertheless, that's what I think about it. So I think that very unlikely that one opinion can be official regarding this issue, publishing or not publishing. So if someone does it, then it's very, if someone has already published it, it will be very hard to recap it. Finalizing, dear colleagues, maybe you wanted to say something and you didn't say. Let's start with Andrei Butchenko and then finish with Mr. Paniotto, Volodymyr Paniotto, and then what you wanted to say about the servicemen, and also the question, if you don't mind. So I've heard that we had a discussion today, and we heard the story about consortium, about the exit polls, what Iryna Bekeshkina was mentioning, and how it's going to work out now. For example, if we have elections, maybe we have to be thinking already on some certain standards of the sociological surveys. Maybe we have to make some preparational stages or for it to be not something sudden in the end of the day. I know that there are some sociological institutions and associations, but what is your opinion about these situations? So let's be honest. So elections, it's not something that we would like to be discussing or not would like to be discussing. My position is that it's not helping us at all. I can agree on that with Mr. Rune, and most likely I think that these elections will not take place this year because scenarios can unfold in various ways. But we have to be preparing for some certain standards. Maybe we can develop some specifics, some standards, the specifics during the war. Because on the one hand, it is said that after post-war elections, but Mr. Kellogg says during the war. So he says during the war, without martial law being cancelled. He said that democratic countries during the war they have elections. That's very good. So for you to understand, I'm not just saying that is a way how Americans raise this question. That is a way. They are not just asking the Americans or the U.S. and international experts. I'm not asked where the elections will take place. I'm asked how to organize it, and that's it. So Ukraine is not asked what would you like to have, and that is a bad signal, And it means that today we are talking about the other things, but nevertheless. So Mr. Andrei and if it is possible. If not, then yes. If you're able to cover this question, that would be great. Can we organize somehow the sociologists and the specialists can unite to develop some specific additional standards during the war? Well, first of all, that's not the first time when the Western society is raising this question, the elections in Ukraine. And indeed, in some places they can be organized, but in the places where the war is like this, and there was the similar war only in Afghanistan and Iraq, and did they have elections? And as for the Netherlands and the UK, during the Second World War, they did not organize elections. That is historical fact. And therefore, yes, indeed, Ukraine can be bent over, but in my opinion, the demand and if they will force us to organize the elections during the war, even if we call it the peace, it's kind of forcing Ukraine to capitulate. In my opinion, there is no shorter way to Ukrainian defeat than organizing the elections during the war, and therefore I do not consider it to be reasonable to organize any kind of on the level of the sociologists any kind of preparation for the possible elections. Besides that, as Mr. Volodymyr has mentioned, and as by the way the Razumkov's Center, according to Razumkov Center research, they had some kind of information regarding sociology, but mostly that were the experts in sociology where they were considering the first post-war elections. And even if we will have the first post-war elections, in this case we will have lots of administrative, organizational problems, legal problems, security and safety, and just technical issues, because the majority of the places where the voting polls where they are physically destroyed and physically they do not exist, and therefore we have lots of questions and the problems which are more important for the sociologists. And I think that in this case the government and the society have to be their best for the elections not to be organized till the end of the war, and any kind of activities in this area, as I agree with the publication of the rates, it is just weakening Ukraine and makes the results of this war less acceptable for Ukraine. How acceptable is a bit different question, but of course undoubtedly less acceptable. And very likely, and Mr. Volodymyr Paniotto was mentioning that in our analytical as very possible option, especially for the electorate which is going to reside abroad at the moment of the elections. So the voting on the grounds of the e-voting or OCR elections, which cannot be taken in the exit polls, and therefore, if we're talking about the millions of the voters who reside abroad and who will vote in this way, well, all of it is not suitable, and therefore I'm against this topic. Once again, I would like to repeat, that is the shortest way to Ukrainian loss. To Ukraine losing this war. So you wanted to say something about military sociology. So today we are not talking about elections, even though I would like to thank you. That is a very important topic. You wanted to say something about the specifics. Yeah, the thing is that just theoretically, yes, so we can have some issues, questions where the opinion of the serviceman will be absolutely different, maybe even 100% different from the opinion of the population of Ukraine. That is just theoretical, because since 2022, the content, the social content of Ukrainian army is very close to social content of the population, of the general population in Ukraine. Second thing is that around half of the population who are not serving, they have relatives and friends in the armed forces of Ukraine. What do I mean by that? It means that they are in touch all the time, so they have the mutual impact on each other, and this impact is quite high. And therefore, considering the fact that the majority of this, so I think that so it's not a methodological problem, and the deviation is not that high. And of course, we can have some quantitative difference, but quality data, well, the results will not be different. And if you don't mind, for us it is a big pain for us. You were asking Mr. Oleksiy the question regarding how we can present the data to the foreign partners. Considering the fact that Western partners, if we are talking about politicians, of course, maybe it's like that, but if we are talking about media, about Western media, in this case, if we look at from the perspective of them willing to show the real situation, because just 1 or 2 weeks ago, in 2025, we face a situation when our results, the results we presented in tables and numbers and in words with narrative, they were by the Catholic German Catholic institution, and the numbers, they have just written that in Ukraine the freedom of speech is decreasing, and they said that it's according to Razumkov's Center. And you know how that in Germany, in some political organization and media organizations, which are very close to the Russian, affiliated with the Russian Federation, and of course it became the big news in Germany, even though there was no word about it in the narrative, and there was nothing like that in the tables. And there are not Ukrainian journalists who we are typically blaming that are the German journalists. So we can have an impact on them only if they have the desire to show the situation objectively. Maybe the politicians have this resource. Maybe research institutions have this resource, but I have very big doubt that Western media want to understand the situation in Ukraine. They just need right picture. Nice picture. Thank you very much. I think that you know where you've seen this information, so there is a feedback there, and we have to respond these kind of issues, and I think that can be one of the options. Yes. The New York Times there was an article published of one of Ukrainian big businessmen that Crimea, in the previous campaign, Trump's campaign, that Crimea can be Russian, part of the Russian Federation. The article was paid for, and there are the people who ordered it, and the author is still angry with me because I, as ambassador, said it. So there is. So this article was paid for to organize a FBI investigation, electorate commission, and they spent 4 years to investigate and 4 more years for the publication. And now there was the article that Ukraine did not interfere in the elections, and how much pressure there was from the Politico's article, and Ukraine has interfered. And now those journalists are calling me and asking, how can we compensate our guilt? And I say, no how, because you just created this problem, and when FBI has started to interrogate them, they said everything. The journalists they were given just the material. They are not working for the money. And as for the fact-checking, they do not do that enough. And therefore, yes, in the US, there are the articles, if we will respond it, and if we will react, they will correct it. New York Times, after this, I haven't seen articles like that. So that is a separate subject for discussion. So they responded, well, great. Mr. Anton? Very emotional statements. You mentioned New York Times, because after the full-scale war, they were interviewing me, and then they were tearing out of the context, and when I was texting them, and they said we meant a bit different option, we are pro-Ukrainian, and so on and so forth. Even though, on the other hand, they were approving the quotes, and there is some certain feedback, but nevertheless, we have the problem that our media are less trusted, less than 30%, but still Ukrainians trust more international media. They don't care about who is the author, and there are some kind of issues with Russian affiliation, and there are people who are reading this news on Telegram. They are saying that it was published by Washington Post, for example. We have a big problem because Institute of Sociology lacks financing, and there are no people who are working on methodological researches on how surveys have to be conducted. We have nothing to compare our results, unlike the situation in Canada and the US. But but we are trying to do everything possible to make it of a high quality. All of us are open for commenting, and before anyone publishes some comment or something, we can explain it once again. And the topic which we didn't cover is how we formulate the questions. So how you can formulate the question in the way that people will be against any kind of territorial consensus. And if you formulate it in the other way, because people will agree, because the people want some solid guarantees. And this thing is emitted by the journalists, for example, as all of you mentioned. So we are publishing with the comments, we're explaining the formulation, we're explaining the differences, and then in some respectful Ukrainian media, you can see you can see the results with some other conclusions. And here we have the issue. We give the feedback, but nevertheless, it's also about the culture of the journalists, especially those who want clickbait and hype. So we are sociologists here, but I think that we should have had the journalists here, and they could have told us why they don't contact us. For example, Mr. Volodymyr Paniotto is commenting dozens of times a week. I'm commenting, many others, but the majority is not asking for the comments. They are giving their own interpretation, which is supporting their opinion. For example, we had the survey on the optimism. Yes, it decreased, but it's still very high. And what do respectful newspapers publish? They say that Ukrainians get less optimism, and therefore the Western media have different understanding of the situation in Ukraine. And that was one of the reasons why we organized this public event for the heads of the centers to be contacting you. Thank you. Yes, if you don't mind, a few things you were mentioning. So first of all, there are refugees. Well, I think that we are also conducting the survey among them, and some of the researchers were both among Ukrainians in Ukraine and abroad. Is it difficult to survey? Yes. Is it representative? No, because we cannot analyze the general situation, but we are conducting the survey, and their thoughts are partially different. The structure is different, but nevertheless, it is possible to conduct the survey, and we conduct survey among those who have American numbers. There is also a problem because there is a survey of the refugees, and those people who have their Ukrainian numbers is getting less and less. So we are combining different methods, and we are using messengers and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, it's possible. You can include them, and in the future, you can consider what kind of moods do they have. And even with Apura, we conducted this kind of researches. So we were asking whether you're planning to vote, whether they trust the results of the elections. And I do not think that the majority will go and vote, because there are some issues. I do not know where, I do not know how. And of course, the post-elections are. And e-voting is kind of comfortable, but I don't trust it, so we do not know what would be the deviation. But nevertheless, I will try to evaluate it because the instruments are available. The second thing is when we were talking about the phone surveys, at the moment, indeed, that is one of the key methods, and due to the fact that it's absolutely random, we can see very reliable results, which for example, it is very close, and after COVID crisis, we could see that there was the results are reliable, and the last year we started to use combined methodology when we make the random generated numbers, but then we refer the person to have online line survey. Online survey is not just a panel with no indicators, and the record is conducted randomly, and that gives us opportunity to make the automatic fulfillment, because one cannot rate 100 questions in your phone, but when you see alternatives, when you can see formulations, and there is no person who is listening to you, that's absolutely different type of survey. And the Institute of Sociology you've mentioned today, we conducted these kind of surveys, and we have implemented them, and they have shown their high quality, and we had village and elderly people very good results, and we even had the Ukrainian monitoring this year in this way, and we have published the results, and these results were used by UNESCO and UNICEF, and of course we have some problems, and we have lots of them, starting with the power outages, and when our servers are not working, and ending up with the big number of the refugees, who it's very hard to evaluate. But the new methodologies, which we together with our colleagues and also with the Institute of Sociology, with the projects we were implementing, they show their high reliability and quality. And as for self-censorship, a few words, yes, indeed, it works, and it has to be there because we organize more than we publish, and of course we do not publish the rates, and we are very careful about regarding any kind of compromises and negotiations. We're not publishing these results because you can always find how to misuse it. And yes, indeed, refugees are not taken account here because the majority is Ukrainians in Ukraine. But we can interview the refugees, and we were doing that, and we will be doing that, and we will move forward. And these methodologies, together with the new methodologies, will be just improved, and in this way we will cover even more population, even including those who are very hard to reach. Even the artificial intelligence will not manage this speed. So the question to Mr. Paniotto, before we finalize, Mr. Haran, you wanted to say something, or you want to wrap up? Okay, Mr. Volodymyr, so we have said a lot, your colleagues have said a lot, and every time your colleagues were referring to you, so the methodology is the key to everything. So I would like you to recap, to say what you would like to end this meeting with, and the separate question, the artificial intelligence, and when sociological surveys will become the part, will be done with artificial intelligence. So, Mr. Paniotto, well, first of all, I was not saying that everything is fine with the sample and with our data. I was saying that from the representative, speaking of the representative data, everything is more or less good, even though it is quite enlarged. I said that there is a systematic sample, and when we're talking about profession issues, it can be around 5-6%, and therefore we cannot interpret data the same way we did it before. We cannot be saying that this difference is significant. We have to take into account what is the very systematic deviation, and the bigger differences have to be described. The differences which in the framework of deviation are not significant because we systematically do not know how it works, so we have to interpret them very carefully, and the small differences in the framework, we should not interpret them. And therefore, I agree with Mr. Valerii. Mr. Valerii wanted to say about it, and he wanted to hear this from us. And then, what can we do with it? And what should we do? I know that there was an idea to have censorship, and I do not know whether we got refused from this idea or not, but that is very bad because we work together with international partners. So, for example, KMIS has around 50% orders from the international partners, and beside that, they are informing us, they're informing their governments. For example, KMIS work with NDI, but as for the rates, they are regularly doing the researches, so the group rate for the Republican Institute, and if we will conceal some data or something like that, it can have an impact on how we will be perceived. Beside that, it will create the vacuum for different speculations, and we will have data which will be interpreted in different ways, and it can be misinterpreted. And therefore, I support what was said today by my colleagues regarding self-censorship, which, in my opinion, is the most adequate response at the moment, and we have to be responsible regarding what we publish. we also publish not all the data we have. We are trying not to collect the data which are affiliated with military issues. We are publishing the rates, and we didn't want to publish anything related to mobilization. That should be some state policy. The problem is that when when it is formulated in some other way, in the wrong way, or our foreign partners, and we also ask these questions. And we're asking how to formulate this question better. And what all of us have to be doing, that is to make a narrative follow up to all our researches. In my opinion, the biggest risk is not the sociological researchers, but media and how they show these data. And sometimes I'm working with a journalist, and even when they approve the text, they are saying that they approve everything except for the title. They have a separate person who is given the names, and that even this journalist is not responsible for it. And we you know how it is published. Everything is bad, everything is lost, and beside that, we have unresponsible political warfare is also the problem. I do not know who is the one who started it, and maybe that was a position and how it is done, but nowadays, after 2 years of more or less stable situation, we have some kind of political issues, and the trust to the government decreases, and we can see polarization, and our resilience is decreasing. And considering the constant resilience,
проти опозиції і десятків там сотень телеграм-каналів. Соціологічні дослідження є одним із небагатьох інформаційних приводів і займають соті частки там 1% від потоку інформації. Тому я вважаю, що не треба демонізувати тут їхній вплив, а тому треба працювати з медіа і особливо з цими заголовками. А для соціологів, я вже продовжую, це самоцензура і, можливо, наші конференції, коли ми домовляємося в рамках там соціологічної асоціації до якихось принципів. Дякую.
Дякую. Ну тоді дякую, Володимир Ілліч. Тоді про штучний інтелект іншим разом. Пане Олексію.
Насамперед, я хочу подякувати. Я хочу подякувати всім, хто прийшов. Я хочу подякувати Валерію Чалому за ідею провести цей захід саме 4 лютого, в день народження Ірини Еріківни. І, мені, до речі, було цікаво, так? Тому я вдячний, да, за цей захід. А завершити я б, може, хотів би феноменом консервної банки, який придумала Ірина Еріківна, і суть його полягає от в чому. І вона каже, що цей закон суперечить законам фізики. Але тим не менше, значить, суть, бо вона була, як сказати, гірний, правильно, туризм, так? Гірський? Як правильно? Гірський туризм. Вона була гірським туристом, і от вона каже, що от ти йдеш, важкий дуже рюкзак, уже не можеш, уже все, падаєш. Що тоді треба зробити? Взяти у сусіда консервну банку, покласти її собі, іти далі, і ти відчуєш, який ти сильний, як ти вмієш долати все, і одночасно допомагаєш своїм друзям, колегам. Тому я закликаю всіх взяти у сусіда консервну банку, якщо він є, Андрій, нема консервної банки, нема, покласти в свій рюкзак і йти далі працювати. Дякую.
Добре. Дуже важливо. Це частина. Я коротко підсумки другої частини. Я дуже вдячний дійсно і тим, хто або дистанційно, і також повністю з нами 2 години провів Володимирович Паніотто. І ясно, що людина, яка визначає дуже багато зараз в соціології. Ми втратили багатьох соціологів, які пішли з життя, і Макеєва, і інших. І ну, це, мабуть, сьогодні не той день, коли будемо все згадувати, але точно, що ми не повинні втратити, я тут, може, трошки посперечаюсь з приводу впливу. Володимирович Паніотто сказав, що не такий вони вплив в цьому всьому, а я в своїй діяльності міжнародній бачу, як це впливає зараз на такі рішення кардинальні для країни, що ми навіть не уявляємо собі, і я бачу, які цифри передаються, і це дані соціологів, розумієте? Це достовірні дані, це дані першоджерел, це не дані медіа, першоджерел. Тому ваша робота тут дуже важлива. І ті питання, які я піднімав, вони не те, що провокативні, вони були для стимулювання відповідей. Для себе багато що зрозумів, і щодо розподілу, і щодо військового компоненту. І, я думаю, почули всі і зроблять свої висновки. Я не нав'язую своєї думки, чи закликаю сприймати думку всіх соціологів. Єдине, що я думаю, було би важливо все-таки, незважаючи на те, що я теж противник виборів, але нагадати про стандарти, і частіше про це публічно нагадувати, про стандарти подачі соціологічних досліджень, це не зайве буде. Я знаю, що подолати клікбейт майже неможливо. Це, я борюсь з цим вже довго, але в заголовках медіа все-таки подолати використання якоїсь цифри з посиланням на структуру, це важливо для рейтингу, хотів сказати, реноме кожної з організацій. Тут представлені найкращі. Ми, до речі, для вашої інформації, те, що сказав пан Головаха, і те, що пан Антон говорив, що ви говорили співпраця. Ми дивимося моніторинг. Пан Головаха сказав, будуть виходити на цей майданчик частіше, представляти дані системних досліджень стосовно стійкості України, стосовно справедливості, цих цінностних питань. І це буде наступні рази. Я, принаймні, як голова правління Українського медіа-центру, колеги, які організували сьогодні, дякую, цей захід разом з демініціативами, участю демініціатив. Для нас це важливо. І ви побачите, як ця тема буде через буквально тижні, наскільки важлива і актуальна. Тому я тільки зацікавлений, щоб до вас звертались напряму, щоб думки фахівців були ключовими, визначені і позиції політиків, і міжнародних партнерів, і загалом прийнятті цих важливих для країни важливих рішень. Дуже дякую. Пані професорка задавала питання, вам дякую, пан Бустрицький, дякую, всі, хто в залі. Журналісти доброчесні, які нас дивилися і використають матеріали цього дискусії в правильному напрямі. Я думаю, що сьогодні не вистачало і для журналістів даних. Це унікальний був брифінг. Сьогодні у нас жодної цифри соціологічної не прозвучало. Я маю на увазі результатів досліджень. Да. Це можна вписати. Я такого, можливо, методологічні дискусії наукові так проводяться, але така публічна перший раз. Тому дуже дякую вам. Ще раз Володимиру Паніотто, КМІС, Андрій Биченко, Центр Разумкова, Олексій Гарань, Демініціативи, Києво-Могилянська академія, професор Антон Грушецький, КМІС, Тетяна Скрипченка, рейтинг. І дякую вам за увагу. Я думаю, ви для себе дуже багато цікавого тут знайшли в цій нашій дискусії. І закордонним слухачам, ті, що в перекладі слухали, я також вдячний. Прошу вас враховувати оцю непросту специфіку в самій Україні. Дякую за увагу.